Hello there. I'm Casey Ottaway, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Philosophers in Football, where I hypothesize what kind of European football managers various political philosophers would be. Today, we're looking at some of the major philosophers from my Pol 302 class, the Vietnam War and Political Theory. Now, before we start, I just want to make clear that there will obviously be a lot of generalizing, a lot of imperfect analogies. This is just a lighthearted, goofy little thought experiment, and it's all for fun. I kind of don't give Pep Guardiola enough credit later on. I feel kind of bad, but I don't. Um, anyway, to be honest, I made this mostly for my own amusement. All opinions are my own. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm going to assign each of these philosophers a football club to manage. And then I'll go down into a breakdown of their tactics, sometimes comparing them to a real-life manager. And up first, we have Fanboy Cho. The team that Fanboy Cho manages is Chelsea FC. He likes to think of his country as a team on the verge of dominating the world, despite a long history of being the opposite, frankly. Chelsea were terrible until Roman Abramovich bought the club, and then they were suddenly super ambitious. And Vietnam was colonized for a millennium, but a little rise in nationalist sentiment in Fanboy Cho, it's got him daydreaming of a global empire. And Fanboy Cho, his managerial comp, is Frank Lampard. Lampard runs a 4-3-3. And he likes to throw a lot of high-energy pressers at the opponent and hope to disrupt them. Kind of like Fanboy Cho was constantly trying to disrupt the French colonial regime with attacks, sabotage, assassination attempts. It's a very active press, but he's not that good at organizing, and there's often a disconnect between the three lines here, and so it's easy to get him behind the team, and it's all a little disjointed, kind of like Cho he was unable to unite a real Vietnamese nationalist cause, and also got captured by French officials. And he's totally willing to, like Lampard, and totally willing to indebt the team or country to foreign support. Lampard spent so much of Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich's money on Chelsea, and Fanboy Cho sought Japan's assistance in toppling the French colonials and the Vietnamese monarchy, which, in hindsight, 20 years later, Japan decided to take over Vietnam themselves during World War II, so don't know if they were super trustworthy. But as you can see here, there's nothing connecting these lines. They're all very spread apart. It works sometimes, but it's not that good. And up next, Fan Chu Trin. And he also manages Chelsea. Fan Chu Trin and Fanboy Cho, you can't separate them. They were contemporaries. They were friends. They were closely linked, despite the philosophical differences that eventually drove them apart. They fought for the same goal at the same time, but they found themselves fundamentally at odds with each other in the end. And like Lampard and Tuchel managed the same team in the same season and used two wildly different approaches with the same squad in the same situation. And Fan Chu Trin, as I just alluded to, is Thomas Tuchel. And so when he's out of possession, he likes to do a 4-3-3 with a holding midfielder in possession. It changes to a 3-4-2-1. He's very cautious not to overreach or chase if it can be avoided. He keeps a very solid defense, kind of like Trin's hesitancy for outright war against France. He maintains and attempts to perfect, with coordinated pressing strategies, the idea of the Confucian collective. And he wants all his players to know the system inside and out, just like Fan Chu Trin's emphasis on education. He loves having this defensive midfielder slide back in between the two center backs, which is why it goes from a 4 in the back to a 3 in the back. These two fullbacks will become wide midfielders or wing backs in line with the two center mids. Striker moves up, two wingers tuck in for a 3-4-2-1 here. And he likes that defensive mid to slide back here because he likes this extra body for recycling possession, maintaining the ball, and also in case of a turnover, he's got an extra man there to help out. Kind kind of like Trin likes to implement some quite modern stylistic tendencies, like dropping a center mid back between the center backs, just like he admires some Western technological and political developments. However, the chemistry between the front three here is a little inconsistent, and it can render the attack a bit toothless at times. You know, Fanchu Trin was a very cautious man. He had his own difficulties with making progress, either with making any progress negotiating with France or with any truly widespread unification of the people because of that rift with Fanboy Cho. Perhaps the unsuitedness of some of these attacking players is because they better fit the previous manager's style. There's a split between those who support Fanboy Cho and Fanchu Trin, and there's no unified nationalist movement. And up next, we have the beautiful Nguyen Nin. He manages Leeds United, but also somehow Borussia Dortmund. Scrappy underdogs, just promoted like Leeds. They're easy to root for. And like with Dortmund, the youth are really leading the way. Let's hope they have Jadon Sancho and Erling Haaland. And so his managerial comp, he's at Leeds. Had to give him Marcelo Bielsa. Football on cocaine. Midfield, what is that? Never heard of it. 4-1-4-1, press like bats out of hell, and always keen to ping a long diagonal. Both fullbacks, both wingers like to get forward when they can. And these 2-8s, they can at times be found making a little run to the edge of the penalty area to try to get a cutback. Unlike other recently promoted clubs, Nguyen Nin is determined to have his youthful side craft a new identity of their own that reflects their preferred style of play rather than overcorrect on the side of pragmatism. Nguyen Nin was a very zealous progressive, and he felt shame when he saw Vietnam had no real culture. When promoted teams have no real culture and just, run a 4-4-2 hoofball thing and hope that that's enough to nick a point here and there. He wanted the creation of a new culture by the youth that they fully bought into. And that's why this comp works so much. Our next philosopher is the Duncan Free School. They are Fulham. Newly arrived to the top flight, made a few splashes early in the transfer market upon promotion, but ended up unceremoniously relegated after a single season in the top flight. Kind of like the Tonkin Free School had the support of some of Vietnam's finest intellectuals, among them Fanboy Cho and Fanchu Trin, but they got shut down by French authorities in 7 months. And there's no direct managerial comp here, so I just kind of came up with one for them. I feel like they try to import new ideas, like a high line for a vertically compact team. They want passing options there. And they run a modern heavy metal press and counter style. But they do so from a very, very old school and very flat 4-4-2 with the keeper tied to the goal line over here. Not a sweeper keeper at all. That proves to be a problem, especially when this high line gets diced up by through balls. And they're also caught out by turnovers. And they try to play this gegenpress with a team full of workhorses. But it doesn't really work. The team lacks creativity. You want workhorses, but you do still need creativity. You need the arts, which the Tonkin Free School just absolutely dismissed. And that's one of their Achilles heels. And so they spend very little time in the final third and don't create a lot of chances. And they also don't have any defensive stability as a trade-off either. And so this is like the Tonkin Free School. They wanted to shake up the stagnancy of the Vietnamese civilization. They wanted to educate people, and implement Western science and modernity, but they were also kind of racist, and they failed to understand the importance of the arts and creativity. Up next, Nguyen. He manages West Bromwich Albion. Brought in as a relegation fight specialist to try and avoid the drop. Did not come close. And his managerial comp is Big Sam Allardyce. Sure, Big Sam isn't as bad as his reputation. He does have an awareness of the existence of modern metrics and analytics. And he isn't opposed to rolling up in a slightly more modern 4-1-4-1, a shake above that outdated 4-4-2 culture. But he's pragmatic to a fault. Nguyen is opposed to revolution to a fault, and he's too deferential to the bigger sides when they meet. Kind of like Nguyen is a little too servile to France's colonial government, sits back in a deep block and just kind of hopes the opponent will give something away via error or set piece. Fullbacks tuck in, wingers go back to protect the fullbacks. There's just this one striker out here alone, and just desperately hoping they get a little lucky that France will willingly lead Vietnam to modernization, to democracy and economic stability out of the goodness of their hearts, which of course didn't happen. And up next, Ngo Dinh Diem, the former president of South Vietnam. His team is PSG. Well, he loudly proclaims to be on the side of the people. In his writings, he writes all about the importance of democracy and personalism. Kind of like PSG, they weren't a part of that attempted Super League breakaway. They believe in the values of football. They're a working class club, but in reality, they're backed by a government that uses the team as sports washing. PSG is owned by Qatar, the Qatari government, a country with a terrible human rights record, specifically surrounding the labor to prepare for the 2022 World Cup that they probably bribed FIFA for. And similarly, Diem uses his rhetoric to sort of appeal himself to the United States, his backers. He believes in democracy, but really he's an authoritarian. And there's no other way to put it. He ruled in a heavily authoritarian fashion. He committed horrific human rights violations against Buddhists. And so he runs out with a 4-2-4. He relies on the superstars provided for him by the extravagant spending of the foreign government that's directly backing him. All those U.S. bombings and direct interventions definitely violated financial fair play rules. And he relies on this to simply overwhelm what he's convinced are inferior opposition that are undersupplied. However, he's prone to getting overloaded in the middle of the park. He's only got 2 central midfielders. And, the Ho Chi Minh Trail easily cut through the 17th parallel. And while the central defenders back here aren't terrible, the fullbacks on the flanks are major weak links. Kind of the way Saigon was very well defended all the way up until the end of the war. But in the South Vietnamese countryside, North Vietnam was able to infiltrate and win a lot of support in many South Vietnamese villages. There's openings here to be had. Our next philosopher is Ho Chi Minh himself. Legendary North Vietnamese leader, beloved by the people of North Vietnam. And his team is Manchester City. Like Diem, he's also kind of backed by a foreign government with questionable human rights records, but it's a little more indirectly than Diem. The Soviets and China only gave some material aid, not direct participation, kind of like how Man City isn't technically owned by the United Arab Emirates government, just by a member of the government. And yet he's also undeniably one of the truly great managers in his own right. He crafts a flexible squad that's committed to his vision without any true immediate superstar infusions. He doesn't get to go by Neymar like PSG do. He doesn't get those U.S. bombing runs. And so he's reminiscent of Pep Guardiola. A lot of the ideas he's famous for, he really just got from someone else. Like, Pep's Barcelona. I mean, that false nine, that tiki-taka, that was Cruyff's idea. But he knows how to read other people's ideas and apply them well. Kind of like Ho Chi Minh wasn't really a philosopher himself, but he was a well-read man. And he used his knowledge to lead well. He knows how to lead a team. He knows how to lead a country. He knows how to inspire people. And so he just has a knack for understanding how exactly to get the best out of his squad, the way Ho won the love and loyalty of the people of Vietnam. And he's willing and able to be flexible in different situations. The way Ho Chi Minh was completely open to forming coalitions to strengthen Vietnam. He reached out to the French and the United States governments when he declared Vietnam's independence, and they did not support him. And he was forced to accept the support of the Soviets and the Chinese. And up next, speaking of the Soviets and the Chinese, is Vladimir Lenin. Now, his team, I mean, the Reds, Liverpool FC. I mean, come on, give me a hard one, please. The Socialist Football Club, Shankly's own, in the city with the richest socialist tradition in England, it's got to be Liverpool. And Lenin's managerial comp is going to be Johan Cruyff. You know, he runs a 4-3-3, and he just changed the way managers thought of football. He's the inventor of the revolutionary false nine, the founder of the teamwork of tiki-taka, and the collectivism of the press. And so in possession, the tiki-taka is a series of high-percentage passes where players pass, relocate to open space, receive, and repeat. And this is all with a shared understanding of the proper spaces to occupy, to not just maintain possession of the ball, but also to promote progression of the ball and creation of chances. The proletariat unite with a common understanding, common control and benefit from production, and a collective progressive mindset. And he also has an understanding of what such a philosophy requires when out of possession, tireless and well-drilled team pressing to win the ball back as soon as possible. Analogous to this, the out of possession is when there's proletariat elsewhere in the world being subjugated, and the organized pressing is the communists working together to free other oppressed proletariats, especially colonized peoples. And this, of course, is what endeared him so much to Ho Chi Minh. Now, just as it's unacceptable that capitalism is ever able to continue to drive colonial oppression, it's unacceptable that Johan Cruyff's team ever does not have the ball. If you lose the ball, you go win it back. And Pep Guardiola, Ho Chi Minh, was one of his most famous devotees. Up next, Deirdre McCloskey. And her team is RB Leipzig. RB exists in football just as a business venture. They're a feeder club, capitalist bootlicker. And, they're good at some things, good scouting program, but they can't really be taken seriously on the biggest stage because they're clearly content to remain a permanent second fiddle to Bayern. The super rich gleefully exploit McCloskey's beloved unregulated capitalist society. And her system, I don't know, it's probably decent, I assume, but it doesn't really matter because as soon as one of those promising youngsters I mentioned earlier shows signs of being a future star, they get snapped up by the oligarchic capitalist overlords, like Google buying a promising tech startup. Bayern's buying all their good players. I mean, come on. It's just defeatist. And finally, last but not least, Kevin Pham, who coaches Atalanta. And despite being on a much, much lower budget than his rivals, they're smart, they're modern, they're fun, they put up elite numbers. Kind of like how, despite being quite young, lacking the widespread readership of many of the other thinkers just yet, Pham has excellent fundamentals. He shows a lot of promise. This is a good-looking team on a very low budget. And his managerial comp is Julian Nagelsmann, the 33-year-old coaching prodigy. And he runs a very, very self-aware 3-4-1-2. A master of innovation, despite his tender age. He's younger than his own starting goalkeeper, Manuel Neuer, back here, who, incidentally, acts as a sweeper keeper, a very modern sweeper keeper, to support this high defensive line. The way Pham is always so conscious of the writer's context to avoid the prejudgment pitfalls to which many others that attempt such a high line fall prey. A lot of high lines get diced up by through balls. But Manuel Neuer is there to clean up, and he demonstrates a promising analytical mind. He's an incredible eye for chinks in the armor of an opposing setup. The way Pham has an incredible eye for seeing, understanding, and explaining the finest details and motivations of the other philosophers. He's a great strategist in his own right, and he's also really good at adjusting to the philosophy of others. This is a very flexible system. These players can occupy different positions based on where the defending setup is. And so keep an eye on Kevin Pham. Could be a future star. All righty. That's all we have for today. Thank you for joining Philosophers in Football. I'll see you next time.